Welcome to the Untold Tales audio anthologies. Written by Dr. Jeffrey A. Robinson and narrated by Melissa Del Toro Schaffner. Elsewhere. Paul Wheatland didn't think anything was particularly unusual with the house until he found the journal. The place was a small cottage of indeterminate age, a quaint little place in the country near Aylesbury, north of London. He'd purchased it as a place he could escape the city on weekends. The real estate agent said it had many owners over the years, and it had fallen into such disrepair and been rebuilt so many times over the centuries that it bore little resemblance to what might have originally been there. Rumors were that it was actually mentioned in a 1089 copy of the Domesday Book by William the Conqueror as part of an ancient fiefdom. However, rumors also suggested that the place was haunted, as were most of the old buildings in the township. In its current form, the house was a worn-down cottage well off the nearest road, half hidden behind a badly overgrown garden and a copse of small gangly trees. Having committed himself to restoring the place, he hired local contractors to repair the roof and the windows and upgrade the tiny kitchen. It was during this renovation that the workers found the leather-bound journal. Initially, he thought nothing of it, except to note that it had belonged to a previous owner some decades before. Paul set it aside and almost forgot about it until he almost threw it away with debris from the remodeling. Opening the journal, he started reading and was startled by the entries. Monday, September 14th, 1998. I didn't travel until a month after I had moved into the house. I have begun this journal to record what I have experienced and discovered since that first incident, because I worry that what has happened is potentially of great importance. However, much of what I need to know remains a mystery, so I have not yet revealed the details of my visitations with anyone else. Paul skipped ahead as the author described himself and the cottage he had purchased. Like Paul, the new owner, a man named Winston Corbigan had to restore the place since it had been abandoned for some years. Winston was a newly published author who purchased the house for the solitude he needed to write. According to the journal, nothing unusual or untoward occurred until one night he went to sleep normally, but woke up elsewhere. I woke with a start and shivered as a cold breeze blew across me. Sitting up, I found myself in an empty field. The sky was dark, and I didn't know where I was. After a moment, I decided that I must have been walking in my sleep. But when I stood up and investigated, I could not see the house. I wandered for some time, exploring my surroundings, and then soon lost my way in the woods. The sun rose, and I found myself in a deep, old-growth forest with unusually tall trees and a sky so clear that I realized I wasn't anywhere near London anymore. I spent the day exploring, wondering where I was, and several times I had to fight back panic. The only reason I didn't run screaming was that I had no idea where I was or where to run. Finally, hungry, thirsty, and exhausted, I planted myself at the base of a tree and watched the sunset. I must have fallen asleep, and the next thing I knew, I woke up once more, back in my own bed. I was, to say the least, quite unnerved and confused. While I had spent an entire day in that other place, I found the date to be unchanged. No time had actually passed, and I wondered if it could all have been a dream. The incident upset me so much that I could not write for days. Life returned to normal, and just as I had concluded that nothing had happened, I traveled once more. As before, I woke from my bed and found myself in a familiar meadow. This time I was more methodical in my investigation of the place, but like before, a day passed and then most of another night before I finally fell asleep and woke once more in my cottage. Paul skipped ahead, skimming the journal. Winston recounted how his visits to that place reoccurred at regular intervals. The incidents occurred monthly and mapped into the different phases of the moon, with some unexplained delay. Worrying that he was going mad, he moved out of the cottage for 6 months, and when his unexplained excursions stopped, he eventually returned. But then, so did his unusual travels. Counting the entries, Paul found they spanned more than 3 years, and details of Winston's trips to the place he called elsewhere continued. Pausing at one entry with a list, Paul read some discoveries that Winston had enumerated and recorded. 1. I only journey at night when I'm asleep, and only on the designated days. I also need to be in the cottage, though not necessarily in bed. 2. I always wake up in the same place. The grass where I find myself has begun to wear thin from my returns there. 3. I always return back home to wherever I left from wherever I fall asleep there. Even if I travel kilometers from my initial site, I always return to the cottage. 4. I started sleeping fully dressed on those days when I knew I would travel. Wearing shoes made my exploration of that other world so much easier. 5. I also found that I could carry small objects with me. For instance, if I slept with a backpack, I could carry food and water with me, and several times I brought objects back with me, though they were little more than pretty stones. Though once I found a beautiful walking stick and returned with it. 6. Surprisingly, I have found that no time passes when I am gone. I installed a camera to watch me during those nights, and there is only a blink when I disappear and reappear in a new position, always asleep. 7. Also, no time passes when I leave that place. I left a watch there, and after spending a month back here, I later returned and woke to find that only minutes had passed over there. 8. The days, however, are the same length that they are here. I have stayed awake long enough to measure the time between sunrise and sunset, and it corresponds roughly to the length of a day here. 9. The stars are nothing like they are here. There are too many there, and they seem far brighter. I do not think that place is anywhere in our world. I have many questions and will continue exploring. Paul paused. This was starting to get a bit strange. Skipping a page or two, he found detailed notes and references to books and articles that Winston had found in a library in London. February 11th, 2002. I am convinced that somehow I am traveling to another world. I have researched such possibilities at several universities here in London, but I can find no direct relevance to such a phenomenon, though there are many myths and stories that certainly relate. There are the old English tales of the fairy realm, and the land of Tirnanog recounted by the Irish. The Australian Aborigines tell of Dreamtime as a place outside of normal time and space. I have even investigated modern theories of wormholes, parallel dimensions, and models of multiple universes, but I haven't found an explanation for what I found. I'll keep looking, though. There has to be something out there that will explain all of this. Paul then found a very long entry. It even had some drawings that Winston had drawn from memory. Friday, May 24th, 2002. Today, I found a city. When I arrived over there, I was prepared to make my longest exploratory trip yet. I had food and water that would last me several days and had stimulants to keep me awake. If I did not fall asleep, I would not return here, and therefore needed to stay awake as long as possible. I easily managed to stay awake till dawn and traveled on foot the entire next day, generally trying to walk downhill, perhaps towards a sea or ocean. Then I rested and ate that night, but did not sleep so that I could continue my explorations on the second day. Then at noon, as I climbed a small hill, I stopped, for there in the distance I saw a city. It was quite far away, but the air there was much clearer than it is here, so I could clearly see tall spires at the edge of the horizon. While I had on previous visits seen evidence of wildlife, small game, and a few groups of deer, I had never seen any evidence of human life before. No buildings, no roads, no telltale signs of smoke or campfires. I had long since concluded that I was alone in the strange, pristine world. I studied the city as best as I could, and have rendered a drawing here of what I remember. I should have thought to bring a camera. I resolved myself to reach that place, but I was already tired from being awake for 40 hours. The sun set, and I saw that there were lights in that distant city. I figured that it couldn't be more than another 32 kilometers away, but that would still be more than 8 hours of walking. Unfortunately, I fell asleep when I sat down to rest about midnight, and woke once more in my cottage back here in England. Paul stopped and flipped back and forth between the pages. Remembering that Winston had been a writer, he wondered if this journal was simply a work of fiction, a story that the author had been writing. But the journal seemed to be real. It related dozens of his trips to elsewhere and his explorations there. If this was fiction, it was remarkably detailed, and it would be far too long to publish. Still, there was more. Paul turned to the two final entries. December 2nd, 2002. For the last 6 trips, I have tried everything that I know to reach that city, but I have not succeeded. I thought I made it on my second try, but discovered a wide river between me and my destination. The current is quite strong, and I fear it would be too dangerous for me to try to cross, especially considering how tired I am by the time I reach it. On my next 2 trips, I searched for a place to cross and ventured nearly 24 kilometers in each direction, but the river stayed wide and fast. I did, however, see 2 long wooden boats beached on the opposite shore of the river. I watched for some time, but I saw no sign of anyone nearby. If I could stay awake long enough in that other world, I'm certain I could find a place to ford the river, or I could even make a raft to cross it, but the city remains just out of reach. On my last trip, I didn't get to see the city at all. It rained quite hard and obscured the landmarks I have been using to travel. I got thoroughly lost and woke shivering and soaking wet in my own bed. I'm not certain what to do, but I am determined to find out what is there. January 6th, 2003. I've made up my mind. I have decided to find a way to stay in that other world longer. I have tried with marginal success to fight off sleep there, but such efforts are always doomed to fail. Sleep is something I cannot forestay indefinitely, and I therefore always return. Therefore, I'm going to try something different. Tonight, when I travel, I will take all of the gear that I can with me, including tools like an axe, a hammer, a small saw, and nails. I will also take a chain, and before I go to sleep, I will secure myself to a tall, strong tree so that I cannot return. I don't know what will happen. I may come back anyway, or I may drag a tree with me when I return. Or worse, I may return missing the foot that I secured with the chain. There is, after all, only one way to find out. Therefore, this may be my last entry. If anyone finds this and I am gone, you will know where I went and how to follow me. And that is where the journal ended. Paul slowly set the journal down and looked up to find that several hours had gone by. It was now dark outside, and it had started to rain. He did not know quite what to think. Was the journal true? Was it a work of fiction? Was it the labor of a writer who had quietly and thoroughly gone mad? Paul was unsure what to think or what to do. The only thing he was certain of was that he wasn't going to spend another night in this house. As he rose and gathered some belongings to take to the small hotel in the nearby town, he grabbed his keys and made sure to take the business card of the realtor who had sold him this place. It's a new season, and we have some new authors and new storylines that will absolutely delight you. And as you know, we absolutely love our listeners, fans, and patrons. If you loved what you heard, consider joining us over on Patreon. That's where all the fun happens. Just visit www.patreon.com/Melissa Del Toro voiceover. If you'd like to read more of the stories in the Untold Tales series, not narrated here on our podcast, you can find Jeff's books on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. The links for all of this information are conveniently listed in this episode's show notes. Thank you and have a wonderful day.